Divers have made quite a discovery off Nantucket Island in Massachusetts, the wreck of a German U-boat.
The Sea War Museum in northern Denmark says it has found a missing Nazi submarine.
And I think you can argue, and argue convincingly, that by, let's say, beginning of December 1941, Germany is just not going to win. It just can't.
Divers just opened Hitler's escaped U-boat in Argentina, and the passenger log they recovered inside has shocked investigators across 3 countries. 60 feet beneath the Rio de la Plata, a World War II German submarine sat undisturbed for 80 years. The forward hatch had been welded shut from the inside, not damaged by time, not corroded, deliberately sealed from within by someone who was still on board when it closed. When the divers cut it open in early 2025, they found a passenger log, not a crew manifest, not operational records, a passenger log, with 61 names documented inside. That kind of document has no business existing on a German military submarine. Investigators have been working through what it means since.
Or punishment that is proportionate to the crime, no taxation without representation, habeas corpus, and so forth.
But there is one detail in that log that has stopped the research cold and is forcing historians to rethink everything they believed about how the Third Reich ended, and the shocking revelation was that 9 of those 61 names are American. Who was U-530? The submarine was U-530, a Type 9, sea long-range boat commissioned in October 1942 under Kapitän Leutnant Kurt Lang, capable of crossing the Atlantic without resupply, and trusted with assignments that did not always make it into standard operational records. She was not a celebrated hunter. She was a workhorse, reliable, long-range, and apparently sent places that other boats were not. Her commander was considered capable and disciplined. His boat was not the kind that showed up in the headlines. Here is why that matters. On May 8, 1945, Germany surrendered. Grand Admiral Karl Donitz ordered all remaining U-boats to surface and report to the nearest Allied port. Most did. The captains who refused understood the war was finished. There was no strategic logic remaining for continued operation. U-530 did not surface on May 8th. She did not surface on May 15th. She did not surface in June. On July 10, 1945, 63 days after Germany's unconditional surrender, U-530 appeared at the entrance to the Argentine port of Mar del Plata and surrendered to Argentine naval authorities. Her commander stated he had been at sea and had not received the surrender order in a timely fashion. The Argentine Navy boarded immediately. The logbook had been destroyed. The crew, which had numbered 55 men when last officially accounted for, now numbered only 15. They offered no explanation that satisfied investigators. The boat had been scrubbed, not maintained, but cleaned the way you clean something when you do not want anyone to see what was there. Cargo spaces were empty in ways suggesting deliberate emptying. The boat showed far more wear than a simple Atlantic crossing would accumulate. The Argentine government handed the crew to American authorities. The Americans interrogated them for weeks. The transcripts were classified and remained classified for decades. The portions since released are heavily redacted. And get this, that is not even what the divers found when they finally went inside 80 years later. The official story that never made sense. The version that entered the historical record went something like this. The commander, embarrassed by the fall of the regime he had served, simply delayed his surrender. The missing crew had been put ashore at some unspecified location. The destroyed logs were routine, nothing unusual, a footnote in the broader chaos of Germany's collapse. Military historians accepted this for about 30 years before they started noticing the problems. The first problem is geography. U-530's stated patrol area in the final months of the war was the North Atlantic. Getting from the North Atlantic to Mar del Plata takes time, significant fuel reserves, and deliberate navigation. You do not end up in Argentina by accident. It is not the route of a vessel delaying an inevitable surrender. It is the route of a vessel with a specific destination in mind. The second problem is the crew count. 40 men do not simply vanish from a submarine at sea. There are no lifeboats for casual departures. People leave a submarine at port, or they do not leave at all. 15 men arriving in a boat rated for 55 means 40 people were put ashore somewhere. The question of where has never been officially answered. Argentina has a long coastline. In 1945, it had a government that was not entirely unsympathetic to certain European refugees. The third problem is the classified transcripts. If the crew had nothing to say beyond embarrassed delay and routine log destruction, there is no reason to classify the interrogation records. Certainly no reason to keep them classified for 40 years.
And we're working with a report that we wrote in 2008 that will give us a nice baseline for comparison.
The American intelligence community in the post-war period classified things for specific reasons. Protecting the reputation of an embarrassed German submarine commander was not one of those reasons. Routine, unremarkable surrenders were not among them. The classification itself is a signal, the fourth problem, and here's the one that keeps serious historians awake, is the timing. July 10th, 1945. The Manhattan Project detonated its first nuclear device on July 16th, 1945. 6 days. 6 days after U-530 surrendered in Argentina, the age of nuclear weapons began. If you were moving high-value cargo, personnel, or technology out of a collapsing Germany, nuclear research materials, weapons scientists, intelligence assets, the window before July 16th was the window that mattered most. Before the world knew what was possible. Before the leverage of that knowledge shifted irreversibly to the Americans. After that date, the world changed in ways that would have made certain kinds of cargo significantly less valuable. Whatever was on that boat needed to arrive before July 16th. It arrived on July 10th. I am not saying I know what was on that boat. I am saying the circumstantial architecture is uncomfortable, and it has been uncomfortable for a very long time. 4 separate problems, each one explainable on its own, all 4 together, pointing in the same direction, in the same time window, in the same part of the world. That is harder to dismiss. But here is the thing. All 4 of those problems were known before 2025, before the divers went in, before the hatch came open. What they found inside is what changes everything. The welded hatch. The joint team from the Argentine Secretariat of Culture and the deep-sea survey firm Patagonia Submarina had first identified the wreck through a multi-beam sonar sweep commissioned for a routine port expansion project, the kind of scan that generates 3-dimensional seabed maps with centimeter-level resolution. Previous surveys of this coastline had picked up anomalous contacts, but could not distinguish a submarine hull from a rock formation. The new system could. That is the only reason this story exists. 60 feet of water, physically accessible since 1945. It took the right sonar to see what was actually there. Before any diver touched the hull, photogrammetric ROV teams mapped every external surface, every corrosion pattern, every penetration, every structural feature, and rendered it into a 3-dimensional model that engineers analyzed from the surface. They knew exactly what they were dealing with before they touched it. The hatch took 3 days to cut open. The Argentine Cultural Secretariat had observers on site. Every minute was on video. When they got inside, the first thing that hit the team was what was not there. Abandoned wrecks look a specific way. Silt coats every surface. Biological material accumulates in layers that marine scientists can date almost like tree rings. Organic material rots. Metal corrodes in slow, predictable patterns. 8 decades underwater leaves a signature that is essentially impossible to fake. The Rio de la Plata had been doing this to wrecks for centuries. It is very good at it. The sealed compartment did not have that signature. The welding had held for 80 years. The space had been completely isolated from the estuary water since the day someone sealed it from within. No silt intrusion, no structural collapse, limited biological growth. By underwater wreck standards, it was almost pristine. Here's the catch. Someone had not just hidden this compartment, they had preserved it. 5 metal containers were secured to the bulkhead with brackets. 2 had corroded beyond anything recoverable. 1 had failed completely. Its seams split. The interior flooded at some point in the past 80 years. Whatever was inside it is gone forever. I try not to think too hard about that one. But 2 had held. If you want to know what was inside those containers, and why it has sent historians, intelligence researchers, and archivists across 3 countries into something resembling controlled panic, make sure you are subscribed to Reef Discovery and have the bell turned on. Because this is the part where the official history of World War II starts coming apart at the seams. What nobody expected about the Americans. The first container held documents wrapped in oilskin, fragile, discolored, needing immediate conservation work. Preliminary assessment identified German operational records and a personal correspondence file, including letters in at least 3 languages. One of them, English. The second container held a bound ledger, hardcover-sized, wrapped in treated canvas over the oilskin. Dr. Valentina Reyes, a conservation specialist from the Argentine National Archive, was the first to fully examine it under task lighting in the archive's document stabilization lab in Buenos Aires, 3 weeks after it was recovered. The binding had gone, but the pages had survived. She almost set it aside. Ledgers from wrecks are rarely extraordinary. Then she saw the column headers. Name, nationality, point of embarkation, date. She read it again. Then she set it down. Read it a third time. Then she went and got her supervisor. It was a passenger log, not a crew manifest, not operational records. A passenger log, formatted exactly the way civilian shipping companies documented non-crew embarkations. Name, nationality, point of embarkation, date, a reference code, column after column of entries, on a German military submarine that had surrendered in Argentina in 1945. 61 entries. 9 of them listed American nationality. And get this, the 9 Americans were not listed the same way as anyone else in that log. The 9 names have been confirmed as American by cross-referencing the nationality designations against formatting conventions and other wartime documents from the same period. Investigators are confident in the identification. The names themselves have not been fully released pending verification. What has been disclosed is the nature of the reference codes. Most European entries carry codes that investigators believe refer to occupational categories: scientists, engineers, administrative personnel. Once partially decoded against known German wartime classification systems, the codes suggest passengers were being transported for professional reasons, not simply as refugees fleeing a defeated regime. The 9 American entries carry a different code entirely.
There had to be a Hitler legacy. If Hitler wasn't going to survive the war, he needed to sort of martyr himself for the Nazi cause.
One that does not appear anywhere in the European entries. One that has not been matched to any known German wartime classification system. Different code, different category, different reason for being on that boat. Here is where it gets uncomfortable. There are only a limited number of explanations for why 9 American nationals appear in a passenger log on a German military submarine in 1945. The first explanation is that they were prisoners, military or intelligence personnel captured in the final months of the war, and being transported somewhere for reasons unrelated to their survival. The most straightforward explanation, also one of the least satisfying. Transporting prisoners on a submarine making a covert crossing to South America is not standard prisoner handling. It suggests something else entirely. The second explanation is that they were collaborators, American nationals who, for ideological, financial, or operational reasons, had been working with elements of the Nazi regime and were being evacuated alongside their European counterparts. This has uncomfortable historical precedent. The relationship between certain American industrial and intelligence figures and elements of the German state before and during the war has been the subject of serious historical scholarship for decades. The third explanation is the one nobody in an official capacity will say out loud. The 9 Americans were not passengers in any conventional sense. They were intelligence operatives from the American side, facilitating the escape route, not fleeing on it. Escorts, handlers, couriers managing a transfer that someone very high in the American post-war establishment had decided needed to happen quietly. Operation Paperclip, the official program that brought over 1,600 German scientists, engineers, and technicians to the United States after the war, was not a secret by the time it was formally acknowledged. The official version says it was orderly and documented. The unofficial version, supported by decades of archival research, says Paperclip was the visible surface of a much larger and considerably less documented operation. Some of the most sensitive transfers never went through official channels at all. 9 Americans on a sealed U-boat in Argentina fits the unofficial version considerably better than it fits the official one. But here is the detail that is still keeping researchers awake. Among the 61 entries in that passenger log, the embarkation points are coded rather than named. 2 of those codes have been preliminarily matched to locations in northern Spain. 1 matches a coastal point in western Morocco. Both were known transit points in the documented escape networks historians call the rat lines. Whoever the 61 passengers were, they boarded in stages from multiple locations over several months, from late April 1945 through early June. The boat arrived in Argentina in July. That is not desperate refugees finding their way onto a boat. That is a planned evacuation with established logistics. And the name at the top of that list, still classified, the reference code next to it, still undecoded, the team working on it has been at it for months. Taking the Hitler escape theory seriously, I know what some of you are thinking, and I want to address it directly because it deserves a serious answer rather than the dismissive eye roll it usually gets. The theory that Hitler did not die in the Berlin bunker on April 30th, 1945, but instead escaped to South America via submarine, has been treated as the exclusive property of conspiracy theorists for most of the past 80 years. And for most of those 80 years, that treatment was not entirely unreasonable. The evidence for his death in the bunker was substantial, even if not every detail was clean. Soviet autopsy reports, witness testimony from people who were there, the absence of any credible confirmed sighting afterward. The consensus view was defensible. Then researchers started examining that evidence more carefully. In 2018, a team of French pathologists was given access to teeth held in Russian archives that Soviet investigators had claimed were Hitler's. The results were published in the European Journal of Internal Medicine. The teeth did not match photographs of Hitler's dental records. They showed no wear consistent with a 56-year-old man. The bone structure they were embedded in was assessed as potentially female. Here's the catch. The Soviet Union had an obvious interest in confirming Hitler's death. A living Hitler somewhere in the Western Hemisphere was a Cold War problem Moscow did not need. The forensic evidence anchoring the official account was Soviet forensic evidence. I am not telling you Hitler escaped to Argentina. I want to be clear about that. What I am telling you is that the evidentiary basis for dismissing that possibility entirely has been eroded by legitimate academic work, and that a sealed U-boat containing a passenger log with 61 names found in an Argentine estuary does not make that erosion smaller. The foundation of the official account was always thinner than the textbooks suggested. What the divers pulled out of the Rio de la Plata does not prove anything, but it fits a pattern that serious researchers have been documenting for decades. What happens next? Here is where I have to be honest with you about the limits of what we currently know, because this story is genuinely unfinished, and I think you deserve the straightforward version rather than the artificially tidy one. The 9 names have been submitted to Argentine authorities, who formally requested cooperation from the United States National Archives and the CIA under the Nazi War Crimes Disclosure Act. The request was filed in April of 2025. A formal response had not been issued as of when this script was written. The reference codes are still being worked on by a team including historians from the University of Buenos Aires, archival specialists from Germany's Federal Archives, and a cryptographic analyst focused on wartime German administrative coding. Progress has been described as ongoing. That is all they will say. The correspondence file includes letters in at least 3 languages, one identified as English. The content has not been disclosed. The oilskin wrap materials were treated using vacuum freeze-drying protocols, and multispectral imaging was applied to the ledger pages, capturing text invisible to normal light, but legible in infrared and ultraviolet wavelengths. Without that technology, significant portions of the passenger log would have been unreadable. The answers were in that compartment for 80 years. The tools to read them properly arrived much more recently. Jurisdictional questions are complicated. Argentina holds the materials, Germany has a legal interest in wartime military records, and the United States has an obvious interest in the 9 American names. Nobody is entirely sure who decides what happens next. And get this, the last time these questions were asked, the people asking them had no physical evidence. Now there is a ledger, documents, letters written in English on a Nazi submarine that surrendered in Argentina in 1945. The questions are the same. The evidence is not. An Argentine naval officer reviewing U-530 in 1945 wrote one sentence that sat in a Buenos Aires archive for 70 years before anyone noticed it. The vessel appeared to have been operated with unusual care for a warship in defeat. He saw it, the missing crew, the destroyed logs, the scrubbed cargo spaces. He wrote it down, and the system buried it, because 1945 had bigger problems than one suspicious submarine in a South American port. That sealed compartment sat 60 feet underwater, while the official story hardened into fact. Hitler died in the bunker. The U-boats were scuttled. Everything ended cleanly. The passenger log names 9 Americans on a Nazi submarine in Argentina. That is not a theory. That is a document someone went to considerable trouble to preserve, seal inside a welded compartment, and send to the bottom of a river. The question of what it means has not been answered. But for the first time in 80 years, it is being asked with real evidence in hand. The river gave up its secret. Whether the institutions responsible will do the same remains the part we are still waiting to find out.